There are mornings when you wake up and the thought of being happy feels exhausting. You don't want to perform joy or chase the illusion of constant progress. You don't want to wear that bright expression that no longer feels like your own. On those days, what you crave is quiet. You want to sit with your sadness, to feel it fully without being interrupted or told to move on. You don't want comfort or advice, only the permission to feel what you feel. Somewhere deep within, that desire to dwell in sorrow can be confusing. Why would anyone long for something so heavy when the world insists that happiness is the ultimate goal? Melancholy is not mere sadness. It is not the piercing pain of heartbreak or the chaos of grief. It moves slower, more tenderly, carrying a strange beauty in its weight. It is a sadness that feels almost safe, a space where you can finally set down the armor you've worn for years. Many people fear this kind of sadness because they mistake it for weakness. Yet melancholy often reveals a quieter kind of strength. It is the body's way of saying it is safe now to feel what once had to be hidden. So much of what shapes us begins not with what happened, but with what didn't. The affection that never came, the words that were never spoken, the comfort we longed for but never received. As children, unmet needs don't vanish. They go underground. We learn to say, "I'm fine," or "I don't need anyone." But those are survival scripts, not truths. Over time, those buried desires don't disappear. They return, softened and unannounced, as melancholy. It is the quiet ache of what we never got to feel. And it often emerges when life seems calm, when everything appears fine, yet a subtle sadness begins to surface. That is the body's way of whispering, "Now, it's safe to remember." Melancholy is the mind's quiet attempt to create room for tears that never had the chance to fall, for grief that was postponed, for mourning that had to wait its turn. Psychologists sometimes call this an emotional backlog, a collection of unprocessed feelings stored deep within us. As children, we are too small to make sense of pain that feels too large. So we adapt. We push it away, distract ourselves, and build walls strong enough to keep the sadness out. But the truth is, those emotions never disappear. They wait. And when adulthood arrives, melancholy becomes the language of that waiting. It is the moment when the desire to feel sadness is not weakness, but readiness, the recognition that we are finally strong enough to face what once would have broken us. Yet most of us were never taught how to stay with melancholy. We were taught to escape it. From an early age, we heard phrases like, "Don't cry," "Cheer up," or "Be strong." We were told that others have it worse, that our sadness was an inconvenience. These messages shape us. They teach us to hide our pain, to see vulnerability as shameful, and to mistake endurance for resilience. So we grow into adults who know how to smile on command, but struggle to sit quietly with what hurts. Sadness, however, is not the opposite of life. It is one of its deepest expressions. Melancholy allows us to feel the passage of time, to sense the beauty in fragility, and to recognize the tenderness of impermanence. When you sit in melancholy, you are not falling apart. You are returning to your humanity, touching the very core of what it means to exist, the ability to hold joy and sorrow in the same heart. There is also a psychological truth worth noticing. When people suppress sadness for too long, the nervous system begins to tire. Years of pretending to be fine, smiling when you want to cry, or pushing forward when you long to rest, slowly drain the body's emotional reserves. Eventually, melancholy rises as a kind of rebellion. It says you do not have to pretend anymore. You can rest now. This is why so many people find melancholy strangely comforting. It does not demand or rush. It simply sits beside you, quiet and patient, inviting release. Crying in melancholy is different from crying in despair. Despair feels like drowning. Melancholy feels like cleansing, as though the tears are washing away years of silent endurance. Yet our culture rarely honors this kind of sadness. We celebrate success, ambition, and optimism, but seldom acknowledge the necessity of mourning the unlived parts of ourselves. We forget that letting go often begins with tears. Just as the sky must rain to clear the air, the human heart must weep to heal its invisible wounds. Think of a child who tried to be the strong one. Perhaps their parents were distracted, struggling, or simply unable to notice how much that child needed comfort. Over time, that child learns to equate strength with silence. They stop asking to be held, stop allowing themselves to cry, and grow into an adult who believes that needing is weakness. Then one day, a quiet sadness visits them. It arrives in still moments, without reason or warning. That sadness is not random. It is the voice of the child within whispering, "I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be comforted. I wanted to be allowed to break too." Melancholy is not simply a wish to be sad. It is the longing to finally be genuine, to feel without restraint, to express without apology, to allow the tenderness that has been denied for too long. It is the body's quiet act of reclaiming the tears that were never given permission to fall. People often ask why anyone would dwell in sadness instead of moving on. But moving on without feeling is not healing. It is only pretending. True healing does not erase sorrow. It embraces it. Melancholy teaches us that sadness has its rightful place in the landscape of human experience. Allowing yourself to be fragile, even for a moment, is not defeat. It is liberation. There is also a spiritual layer to melancholy, one that poets, artists, and philosophers have explored for centuries. They describe it as a strange and beautiful longing, a way sorrow refines our perception of life. When you sit in melancholy, you start to notice the subtle details, the rhythm of rain against the window, the way sunlight stretches across an empty street, the quiet air of a room filled with memories. Melancholy slows the world down. It reconnects us to time and reminds us that living fully is not about chasing happiness, but about experiencing the full range of emotion that makes life meaningful. Modern psychology supports this truth. Studies show that people who allow themselves to feel sadness rather than avoiding it become more resilient. Those who can embrace melancholy often describe feeling more connected, more empathetic, and more creative. It seems that by walking into the shadow of our own sorrow, we become more open to the pain and beauty of others. Through that shared vulnerability, we rediscover a deeper sense of belonging. That may be the hidden grace of melancholy. It is not merely personal restoration, it is connection. When we let ourselves be vulnerable, we silently grant permission for others to do the same. When we admit that we too sometimes crave sadness, we pierce the illusion that everyone else is fine and only we are struggling. Melancholy is not isolation, it is invitation. It whispers, "Come sit with me for a while, and let us remember what it means to be human together." So when you feel that gentle heaviness in your chest, that quiet yearning for sadness that arrives without reason, do not rush to silence it. Do not cover it with noise or distractions. Sit with it. Listen. That desire to be sad is not weakness. It is your inner voice asking to be acknowledged, the part of you that has waited too long to be heard. What makes melancholy even more mysterious is that it often appears when life seems steady. You may have stability, comfort, and no visible crisis to explain it. Yet in the quiet moments, when the world slows and the noise fades, you feel it rise, a soft ache, a tender shadow settling beside you, and instead of resisting it, you find yourself wanting to lean closer, as though the sadness carries something sacred. That sacredness is truth. For so long, many of us have lived behind masks of confidence, of competence, of strength. But melancholy asks us to take the mask off and face ourselves as we are. It tells us to stop pretending to be invincible, to stop pretending that we were never hurt, to finally admit the quiet losses we have carried for years. In this way, melancholy is not an enemy of life but a companion that leads us back to truth. The desire to be sad is not self-destructive. It is not a longing to fall apart forever. It is the body's way of seeking release. Think of it as holding your breath underwater. You can force yourself to hold it for a long time, but eventually your body demands air. In the same way, you can hold in your pain, your tears, and your unspoken needs, but your soul will always call for release. Melancholy is that exhale after years of holding your breath. Much of this feeling has its roots in childhood. Imagine a child who had to grow up too fast, who became the caretaker instead of the one cared for. Maybe their parents leaned on them for emotional support. Maybe they were never allowed to cry, never given permission to fail, never told it was safe to need. That child learns early that love must be earned through strength, not vulnerability. They carry that lesson into adulthood, often without realizing how heavy it has become. And years later, when life finally slows down, melancholy appears as the quiet rebellion of that inner child. It whispers, "I wanted to be held. I wanted to be heard. I wanted to rest." When you feel the pull toward sadness, it is often that younger self asking for the comfort they never received. It is the longing to release the anger, the loneliness, the unmet needs that were buried in silence. This is why melancholy can feel strangely nostalgic. It carries echoes of moments when you needed something deeply and were told you could not ask for it. Psychologists often speak of the inner child, but this idea is more than metaphor. Neuroscience shows that the memories of emotional neglect and unprocessed pain remain stored in the nervous system. They do not disappear simply because we grow older. They wait quietly, patient and unseen, until a moment of safety arrives. Melancholy is often that moment when your nervous system finally says, "Now you are strong enough to feel what once overwhelmed you. Now you are ready to mourn what was missing." Mourning is an essential part of healing because without it, the past stays trapped within us. We keep repeating the same patterns, chasing approval in all the wrong places, endlessly trying to prove our worth because deep down, we never felt enough. Melancholy opens the doorway to ending that cycle. When we allow ourselves to sit in sadness and let the tears fall, we create space for renewal. We stop running from the past and begin to face it, to acknowledge it, and slowly, to let it go. There is also something deeply human about the way melancholy connects us to art, music, and poetry. Think about why we return to sad songs, or why films that make us cry often linger in our minds longer than those that make us laugh. Sadness brings us closer to truth. Happiness can sometimes skim the surface, but sadness reaches into the heart of who we are. When we listen to a melancholic song, we hear our own unspoken feelings reflected back to us. When we cry at a story, we recognize the quiet longing we carry within. That is why art and melancholy have always been intertwined. Art gives us a safe space to feel what daily life teaches us to suppress. Even in spiritual traditions, melancholy has been seen as a kind of wisdom. Ancient writers described it as the sorrow that gives birth to compassion. When you have sat with your own sadness, you begin to recognize it in others. You notice the tremor in their voice, the silence behind their eyes. And instead of trying to fix or silence them, you can simply sit beside them and let them know, without words, that you understand. In this way, melancholy deepens empathy. It transforms private sorrow into a bridge between human hearts. Yet it is important to recognize the difference between melancholy and despair. Melancholy is the desire to be sad so that you can release, so that you can heal, so that you can touch the depth of life. Despair convinces you that nothing will ever change. The difference is movement. Melancholy allows you to feel and then breathe again. Despair traps you in stillness. The invitation, then, is not to sink forever into sadness, but to ride the wave of melancholy as it washes through you, cleanses you, and then recedes. When you honor melancholy in this way, you uncover its quiet gifts. You begin to see that tears are not signs of weakness but of cleansing, that feeling sad does not mean you have failed at life, but that you are alive enough to feel its full depth. Letting yourself fall apart for a moment does not mean you are broken. It means you are human enough to need rest. And perhaps that is what makes melancholy so profoundly healing. It allows you to admit that you are tired of being strong all the time. It gives you permission to rest in your own arms, to care for yourself in the way no one could when you were small. It is the longing to be vulnerable, to be seen in your weakness, to stop performing and simply exist as you are. That is why, paradoxically, the desire to be sad often comes before growth. Because only when you release what you have carried for too long can you finally move forward lighter. Only when we mourn the love we never received can we open our hearts to the love that is still waiting to find us. Only when we acknowledge our exhaustion can we begin to uncover a new kind of strength. So when melancholy visits, welcome it. Sit with it as you would with an old friend who carries messages from your past. Listen to what it has to say. It may speak of forgotten needs, quiet wounds, and the deep fatigue of pretending to be fine. It may ask you to cry, to slow down, to release what has been held too tightly. And though it may feel heavy, remember that this weight is not here to crush you. It is here to free you. At its core, melancholy is not only about sadness, it is about truth. It is about remembering the parts of yourself that were once left behind and giving them permission to exist again. It is about allowing yourself to feel what you once silenced, to bring into light what was buried in shadow. Through that process, you begin to feel whole again. So if today you sense the quiet pull of sadness, do not resist it. Do not hide it beneath forced smiles or fill the silence with distractions. Sit with it, breathe with it, let it move through you. Because within that sadness lives your humanity, your capacity for healing, and your hidden strength. Melancholy is not the end of joy. It is the threshold that allows joy to return, no longer as performance, but as something genuine, something earned through the courage to feel.